Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malman in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City, sabbatical. Rabbi Kalmanovsky, great to see you guys. We have an amazing Parsha. We always do. And we're going to find something very, very interesting about Parasha Tzav, which many people, let's face it, once it starts talking about sacrifice and this is the way to do it, people kind of say let's fast forward to the good parts and to Kiddush. But let me ask you at the beginning, how should we relate, or how to understand the first part of this parsha, which deals with, I guess, more of the details relating to the sacrifice, and we're going to talk about the second part in a moment. So I'm going to go to you, Barry. Tell us how you relate to Zot Torat HaOlah.
So for the rabbis, Sefer Vayikra is Torat Kohanim. And Baruch Levine observes in his commentary that Torat Kohanim has two meanings. It's the teaching of the priests, of their domain, and it's also teaching for the priests. So what we had last week in the first 5 chapters of Vayikra are the sacrifices, the way that Bnei Israel has to understand them. What you bring, when you bring it, what happens. This week in chapters 6 and 7, we get the sacrifices from the point of view of the priests. So there are fewer details because the priests pretty much know what they're doing, and there are a few things that they need to be reminded of. And so it provides a nice coda for last week's Parsha, because we now have a complete unit, the first 7 chapters of priestly teaching and teaching for the priests as well.
And so, reading through these, the first 2 chapters of the Parsha, what we get is we really have a kind of menu. The menu, again, in detail of all the different sacrifices. So, for example, you have the Olah, the burnt offering, the Mincha, the meal offering, the priestly offering, the Chatat, the Asham, the Zevach HaShlamim, and again, it takes us into a world in which there are specific kinds of sacrifices for specific kinds of occasions, and there's specific ways to do them.
Right, and we could actually see a kind of reorganization of the material, because the Zevach Shlamim, which was the third of the 5 sacrifices last week, is now moved to the end, because that's the one sacrifice that everyone gets a cut, God, the priest, and the offerer, so it's put at the end. The interesting one here is the Minchat Miluim, because it's hard to categorize that. On one hand, it's a grain offering. On the other hand, because it's offered on behalf of the priest, it has to totally be burned to God. So it should go with the Olah in some ways. On the other hand, it should go after the Mincha, because it's a variation of the Mincha, which is how it appears here in the list at the end of chapter 7.
I was going to say, when you said everybody gets a cut, you should say some people should get the prime cut.
Well, God apparently gets the best.
God gets the best, but there's still some good cuts left over, I suppose, right?
Well, the priest doesn't come off, but the funny thing, at least for me, is that apparently the Israelites ate their sacrifice boiled.
They boiled it, yeah. So
and I'm just reminded of my father, who grew up in a house with his grandmother, who made Friday night dinner, but she had a very circumscribed menu. The only thing she knew how to make was chicken soup. So my father grew up in a house eating boiled chicken every Friday night, and as soon as he left home, he never ate chicken again.
Look, boiled chicken is not that bad, and it depends. In my old days, a lot of ketchup. All right.
I think that the sacrificial system, I hasten to add that when I see, as is true, that there are people in this world today who want to reinstitute it for real and build a new Beit HaMikdash on the Temple Mount, and implicitly, or maybe not so implicitly, explicitly, remove the Dome of the Rock. This is horrifying to me. That would be an utter disaster. But I am also not in the camp of people who don't find, who find this like bizarre or uninteresting or primitive, because I think that there's an enormous amount of poetic power in the sense of communion, of sharing, as Barry said, sharing this meal between heaven and earth, of aesthetics and art, and the poetic power of Eish Tamid Tukad Al Mizbeach, the perpetual fire. The fire is always going. That just has a tremendous spiritual resonance. How could that not have a spiritual resonance? That the fire that is in the physical fire that is used in the rituals is representative of spiritual fire that you're also supposed to have going. And I think it's profound. Also, we were talking before we started recording about the enormous gaps between rabbinic Judaism and biblical Judaism, and would biblical Israelites have even understood or recognized, Judaism as it developed. And in the main, I'm in the category of people who, in the main, I don't think that there's such a strong criticism of what went before. In the main, I think that the rabbis are developing it. But there's this awesome midrash that's on Vayikra Rabbah in this parasha, great midrash that talks about the demands for purity and perfection. The animals have to be perfect, and the priests have to be perfect, physically unblemished, and they can't have this or that disability, or they can't have this or that wound. And they're trying to create this perfect thing. And the midrash on this says, quoting the verse Psalm 51, Zivche Elohim ruach nishbera. The true sacrifice to God is a contrite spirit. And the midrash goes, if people use broken vessels, that's like, you're just like you're kind of a loser. Like you eat off broken plates, and everything in your life is kind of a mess. But God uses only broken vessels. God uses only kelim shvurim, because the only the broken vessels, the ruach nishbera, the broken or contrite spirit, that's the true offering to God. That's like the rabbis coming as close as they possibly do to say, yeah, all that purity stuff, all that perfection stuff, we don't have that. We have brokenheartedness and open, your heart's broken open or something like that. That's just a great midrash.
Well,
Right,
I want to pick up on that because I think, and I get sometimes very literal in reading this and saying, that there's a profound, I don't want to use the word spectacle, but there's a profound awe in all of this. We kind of touched on that with the fire, the blood, and just the approaching the boundary between life and death. And also, don't forget that in the process of bringing the sacrifice, there's a lot of severing and sectioning and cutting going on, where a whole is taken and made into pieces, and then the pieces then are put on the altar as a new whole and made into a new whole. And so, building on what you said, Jeremy, in terms of the brokenness. Well, yeah, we're not always in a permanent state of brokenness, but we're in a state of moving from brokenness to wholeness to brokenness to wholeness, and that life itself is about reconstituting ourselves in different forms through different periods. Look, we're sitting here thousands of miles away from a shattering world epoch-making experience where an entire country is being crushed and shattered. And we're in the hope that something. We don't see the end of this yet, but the question, will something new emerge from that? Who knows? I mean, it's terrifying to even think about. And I think that the temple ritual captures in some way that terrifying nature, because those of us who are sentient, we all are sentient to a certain degree about animals, living things. It's alive, it's dead, it's breathing, it's bleeding. You cannot be but moved by that. And then it's whole, it's taken into pieces, and it's reconstituted. So something very powerful is going on there, just on the visceral level. I mean,
visceral.
Oh, we have a lot of viscera in these parshiot. What I wanted to add to what Jeremy said is that the offerer is broken, but the offering must be perfect.
Yeah.
And it makes a distinction between us as the offerer and what we bring to God.
Right.
And we can't be perfect, but we can seek to bring perfect things to God.
Right.
And we shouldn't think that in our imperfection that we're lacking, because that's how we approach God holy. You know, it was Nachman of Bratslav who said, "There's nothing so whole as a broken heart."
Yeah, this is why we have to. This is the moment at which all Western English-speaking American Jews refer to the great Reb Eliezer ben Natan, Leonard Cohen.
Oh yes, of course.
Yes. Forget, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
So the light gets
He was so good, and
Yeah.
you can tell with a pasuk like that he probably knew that midrash because he did have a great Jewish education, but he certainly knew the theme of sacrificial perfection and human imperfection.
Okay, so just give us a little footnote, a postscript. So that the text does make mention of a commandment that appears several times. V'chol dam lo tochlu, b'chol moshvotechem la'ofer labayma. A restriction on the consumption of blood. We may have touched on it in the past, but it's worth reminding our viewers, listeners about it. What's going on here with the restriction against blood? Just since I mentioned ketchup.
Blood is seen to be the life force, and you also can't eat chalev, these kind of fats. They're for the sacrificial. But if the animal is nevela trefa, if the animal is like died or not shechted and kosher, you can. It says in the Torah today, or this parsha, you can use the fat, presumably as some sort of maybe candles or something. However it is that they rendered fat, but no blood, never, nowhere. B'chol moshvotechem. Wherever it is that you live, or perhaps in the land of Israel, but not outside the land of Israel. I'm not sure about that. But the blood is seen to be the life force. There's a Mishnah in Nidarim that says, what's the difference between kosher animals and treif animals? In kosher animals, I, God, own the soul and I give you the body. In treif animals, I, God, keep the soul and the body. So you can have the body, but the life is symbolized by the blood belongs to God.
Okay, so let's move into the second half of this parsha, which is, I think, as silent as it is, it's filled with a choreography and it's filled with symbolism, and it's meaningful in ways that we can draw out meaning. Let's call this section the ordination of the priest, or the getting ready, the ceremonies that are important for inaugurating the sanctuary. So just the scene is, everything is built, everything is kind of ready to go, but the operators are not installed yet. The people that are going to be doing all of the sacred rituals, they're not installed. And these people are presently not in that state, and they need to be taken from the state of their ordinariness to the state of readiness. And let's we should go into this. The chapter starts Kach et Aharon ve'et banav in chapter 8. Take Aaron, God is saying to Moses. Moses is like the officiant, right? You take Aaron and his sons, ve'et begadim ve'et shemen hamishcha. So he's got clothing and he's got the oil, the anointing oil. He's got the parachatat, the sin offering, the cow, the bull. V'shtei elim ve'etzalam atzot. He's got one bull, 2 rams, and a basket of matzah. Okay, what's going to happen now? Want to take us into this ritual here? Let me be the ritual guide, okay?
You'll be the
I'll do the ritual guide. So they're going to sacrifice. They're going to slaughter the bull. They're going to pour blood of the bull onto the horns of the altar, and he's probably going to take more blood and put it on the base of the altar, and that kind of gets the altar started. And then they're going to take one of the rams, and that's going to be a complete burnt offering, and the other ram is going to be hacked up, and Moses will get one of the big pieces of it, the chest piece, and the other priests are going to get the other parts of it. They have to boil it, like your grandmother or grandfather, right? Okay, and over time, they all get anointed with oil. They all they all have this experience where oil is anointed them, and we're not exactly sure how it anoints them. Is it on their forehead or their whatever? It's they're covered with oil, and then they're given a little bit of blood that's put on their ear, their right thumb, and their right toe. Okay, I think this is at the point where people read this where they kind of like, thank you, I'll take the check, please, but uh, so the experience of this is the experience of consecration, um,
as at least partly um, emphasized by the word lehakriv. Lehakriv typically means you offer the animal, but it also says that Moses, I'm trying to find the verse itself right here, Vayakrev Moshe et bnei Aharon, Vayal bishem kutonot v'yachgorotam avnei, that Moses brings the children of Aaron near. It's the same word that he would use to offer an animal.
yes,
Because the bringing these people into their human service is itself, like you said, a sacrifice, not in the sense that they're going to be killed, although two of them are going to be killed. See you next week. But a sacrifice in the sense that they are made sacred.
Okay, so now on that theme then of coming close, I think embedded in this story is like a trauma. There's this we talked about a little bit last week. It's like, are you going to be accepted? And it's the fear of rejection, and coming close is dangerous. Coming close to God is really dangerous. And I would say that one of the ways to understand the whole architecture of all of these rituals, which seems so foreign to us and so distant, is precisely the awareness of the danger involved in doing this. I made the analogy to, you're operating a nuclear reactor. If you operate a nuclear reactor, you need to be protected from the core. You need to be removed from it. You need to be wearing a special, set of equipment and protective gear, because if you do one wrong move, you can have a Chernobyl. You can have a total meltdown. You could endanger the world, basically. And it's not far-fetched to make the analogy that the priests in the temple feel their role so central to the operating of the world and the connection of God to the world, that they are taking meticulous care of this, even at the cost of maybe morality. They're not, they'll operate the laws by the law, even if it's may not seem right to them. You think? I mean, that's the inevitable conflict that happens. Barry, you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, to point towards next week, it's interesting in light of your comments to speculate on whether we think the deaths of Nadav and Avihu are acceptance or rejection. They're going to die, according to some of the commentaries, because they get too close. But then there's Moses's cryptic words to Aaron about how those who are holy become close to me. But we can save that for next week. The other thing that is suggestive in what you said is that we look at the Kohen, and the Kohen's clothes also have to be consecrated, because there's this kind of seamlessness between the Kohen and his clothes. We don't want to keep them separate. When the ear and the thumb and the big toe are anointed, the Kohen becomes like the altar itself.
That's right.
So that the Kohen himself is embodying two different aspects of the physical world. He's the altar on one hand and the special person in one.
I would say,
special clothing. The clothing, I think, is also a great piece of evidence for that point. They're called bigdei hasrad, and srad, I think, it's like the word sharet. It's the clothing that is itself a service, itself worship. So I think that draped on their bodies is their service.
So on the notion of making the Kohen a kind of walking altar, which is such a fascinating idea. There's another explanation that these are protections that by putting blood on the extremities, the ear, the thumb, and the toe, there's a kind of warding off of disease. But I think I'm inclined to the altar interpretation, in light of the fact that I don't know if you remember back when we were talking about the Korban Pesach in Parshat Bo, where you take the blood and you put it on the doorpost and the lintel, and on the one hand that functions as a protection for the house, but it also makes the house into a kind of enclosed altar, right? Because here in this chapter, what they're doing is, in order to consecrate the altar and to enable them to use it as an altar, they put blood on it. Blood is an indexing. It says this is what it is. And so, and the altar in the sanctuary was going to be the permanent altar for the people, even though it got assembled and disassembled. But the homes of the Israelites, that was temporary. I mean, they were leaving it, but it had to still maintain some kind of consecration for the holy act that they were doing, which was the sacrifice of the Korban Pesach, which is essentially a Zevach Shlamim, a well-being offering that they were all going to feast on. And it's prior to all of these rules where they didn't separate the chalev and they didn't cut it into pieces. They roasted it whole. In a sense, it's a primitive form of this kind of offering. Okay. So I mean, all these things are happening here, and we're coming close to the meanings of these things, the symbolism of that, and it's very powerful.
I just want to say there was a he's dead. He was a late Jonathan Z. Smith was his name. He was a professor of religion at the University of Chicago, and he wrote about holiness. He said holiness is a method or a marking of paying attention.
Yeah.
To designate something and say, this is incredibly significant. That could be a time, it could be a person, it could be a place. And I think for those of us who are diaspora Jews, I mean, Israeli Jews too, but if you believe that God is the God of the cosmos, right? And you should believe that. And if you believe that God is everywhere, and you should believe that, the whole idea of sacred places doesn't always go down so easily. God can be found in anywhere. But in our religious cultures, we do designate certain places, certain activities, certain things as this is what you must pay attention to. And all of this stuff, marking the Kohanim in that way, marking their clothing in that way, marking the altar and the Mishkan. It's I think a very powerful claim that if with this in this context, you can pay attention and see sanctity in a way you can't see it everywhere.
Sure. Barry, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. The way you described the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim is quite striking, because what we have here is the ultimate priestly act. By daubing the blood on the lintel, this is going to separate life from death, because those who are inside are going to live, and those who are outside are going to die. And so the house itself becomes an altar, and we know from a later tradition in the book of Exodus that the altar itself can protect people. If you grab onto it, you're provided sanctuary, and those houses in Egypt were a kind of mikdash mad, a little sanctuary for the Israelites on that fateful night.
It all lines up. It all comes together, and that's the more we delve into these symbols, these rituals, I think the more we see that they're actually speaking to a real narrative. And the other point of this, before we move on to the last point, which is this is all done in silence, and contrary to great inaugural festivals like coronations or inaugurations. You think back. Of course, the inauguration of president is a great secular political event, but it happens with pomp and ceremony, music, bands, invocations, poetry, all the rest. And I showed this week the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, 1953. God bless her. God bless the Queen, right? So it was done with choirs and music and all sorts of great pomp and ceremony, clothing, etc. All of this is done in silence. It's done in such austerity, because once you're in the sacred confines of holiness, there's nothing else but God. And even, and this is an idea that is reflected on by one scholar pretty deeply. Yisrael Noel talks about the sanctuary of silence, that you really heard nothing going on there, and it's quite profound. Everything, all the singing was going on outside of these areas, but inside it was all quiet, all holy, all pure. Yeah,
So that silent sacrifice is an echo of the great sacrifice in Sefer Bereshit, which
absolutely.
is when Abraham puts his son Isaac in total silence upon the altar. The first sound that we
Absolutely.
hear is the ram.
So is it an accident? Yeah, that we have two rams here. One is a burnt offering, and one is a meal. The ordination offering. The ram of the inauguration is the burnt offering. And I mean, you don't have to be a Bible scholar to make the connection here. The ram that was at the Akedah, that was a substitute for Isaac. I mean, are we hearkening back to the Akedah here? Do you think? Could be.
It's hard not to think that. It's hard
Hard
not to
Yeah.
think that.
Okay.
And
I would agree
you
with that.
also, by the way, the holiday off rams. I don't know my ovines that well, but the sacrifices are typically cows or sheep and goats. Rams are in the asham. Rams are in the holiday musafim, and the rams are here. I guess the nazir also has an aisle, but whatever. Maybe there's something going on about what's like a really domesticated versus what is a
wild, absolutely.
And your
wild.
computer also has RAM.
There you go. Okay. All right. Speaking of which, all right. So the parsha ends with this. Okay. Ufetach ol moed tishvu yomam valayla. The priests who are being consecrated, they have to stay at the opening of the tent of meeting, day and night, shivat yamim. They have to be there for 7 days. They're in a sense sequestered in the holy area. And we were talking about this a little before we started, which is this whole idea of the transition period, the 7-day transition period. It's such a fascinating idea. Okay, so for Jeopardy, where else do we see that in Judaism? A 7-day transitional period. Barry?
Well, the week would be the first thing that comes to mind, which culminates in Shabbat.
The primary
seventh day.
ordering feature of a Jewish life is the
Okay,
week.
Shivat, the 7 days of mourning after the death of a close relative. The Sheva Brachot, we had a wedding of one of the faculty members at my school this past Sunday. So there's Sheva Brachot for 7 days. We rejoice with the bride and groom. And then here we have this ordination. And I think in each case, we have the symbolism of creating a world, that at the end of the week, we have a new world. And for mourners, it's the transition and learning how to come back into a world without their loved one.
Yeah.
For the married couple, it is becoming one in the world as a couple when they entered it as single individuals. And here, I think for Aaron and his sons, it is becoming something other than who they were before.
Yes. It's a real transition. I mean, I'll add to it Brit Milah, which takes place on the 8th day, but that means 7 days have gone by. And of course, the main holidays, Sukkot and Pesach, which are also 7-day festivals.
One more, and it relates to Brit Milah exactly. Brit Milah is a clean week, and then the 8th day is the thing, is the circumcision. The Miluim are 7 days, and Bayom Hashmini, next week's Parsha, the 8th day is the consecration. Also, by the way, just one other is that a baby animal is not to be killed in its first week of life.
Yes.
It stays 7 days tachat imo, nursing from its mother. Miyom hashmini bahala yeratze damo. But from the 8th day forward, it would be acceptable as a sacrifice. So they definitely have a system of thinking that a week is the status change. The mourning, the celebrating, the baby animal, the holiday. It's a week. It's 1 week of status changing.
It's a fundamental aspect of just the way we live. We tell time, basically by weeks. I think never mind the biblical experiences, biblical ritual, but also in life. Of course, we have the morning rituals of Shiva, but I'm thinking. I remember back to 9/11 and other catastrophic moments. It was something when a week passed, right? And so a week is the basic unit of time that allows for you to transition from one zone to another zone. And here we're seeing that very directly. And I think all rituals have that element to it. They're all boundaries of from one zone to another zone. We talked about the life cycle rituals. Even a bar mitzvah, even though a bar mitzvah doesn't take place for over a week, we truly get the sense that the moment that individual, that young person, emerges, it's the transition away from childhood and to the beginning of adulthood. And while it doesn't take place over 7 days, certainly I've noticed in celebrating a few myself in my family, that week, the week after bar mitzvah, it's a great week. I've never been disappointed by it. There's a certain glow that lasts for that whole week. That look what we did. Look at this. This is amazing. You're amazing. Your kid's amazing. Whatever. And there's real simcha there. And I've experienced it, many times. And I often tell families, when they're experiencing that. So you're going to see something different, and you're going to be on a high. There's going to be a different kind of lightness for that whole week. And then of course the next week comes and it's gone. Because you have to, I don't know, pay for it.
You got to pay for it.
Anyway. All right. We got some thoughts as we conclude this. We're I know we recorded a few things before Purim, but we're doing this on the day before Purim. But this will be after Purim, and we got Shabbat Parah coming up next. Well, we got a lot of things coming up, but we have some closing thoughts here. A benediction, Rabbi Sabbatical Kalmanovsky. The closing words.
The closing words? I don't know.
Asher tiva Adonai et biyad Moshe. That's the last word of the Vayas Aaron uvanav et kol advarim asher tiva Adonai biyad Moshe. That's a coda to this parsha. Right?
Well, this Leviticus is, on top of everything else, it is very tightly written, and it's impressive in that way. I'm just going to go with the for a final word. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the parsha.
Yeah.
Keep the perpetual fire going. Don't let it go out. Don't let it go out. You got to keep the fire going. And that is like everybody's religious mission, spiritual mission.
Good. Recognize the fire. Keep it burning. All right. With that, we've kept our Parsha Talk burning. We're over 2 years now in Parsha Talk land, and it's great. Yeah. All right. So everyone, have a wonderful Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next week on another edition of Parasha Talk. Shabbat Shalom.